Awesome. Thank you, Lana. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. My name's Simon Unger. I'm a principal animator at Santa Monica Studios, and I also am an instructor at Vancouver Film School. Welcome to our panel on production. Before we jump into the dark and mysterious world of production, let everybody here introduce themselves, starting with Caroline.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Caroline Livingstone. I work at Humanoid Studios right now. I have come from BioWare. I worked there for about 20 years doing voiceover, and then I transitioned into performance capture and the motion capture world and producing that content for BioWare. I kind of straddled both worlds on my journey in video games, so I dabble in the creative as well as production. So yeah.
Awesome. And John.
Hello, good to be here. I'm John Schutts. I work at Sumo Digital as an executive producer. I'm based in Nottingham, England. I've been in production for, wow, probably most of my life, going on, well, over 20 years now. And yeah, it's hard to believe. So I've been, yeah, working on console PC games, also worked in mobile for a while, and also production on the publishing side as well as development side.
And last, we have Skyler.
I'm Skyler. I'm the producer at Steamroller Studios, specifically Steamroller Animation. I've been with Steamroller a little over 2 years, but I actually come from a unique background of I did project management originally within nonprofits and event management with just a passion for animation and games on the side. So then I kind of brought those worlds together and I started at Steamroller originally as a production coordinator. And over the years, I've worked my way up and I'm now the head of our production department. And I work alongside some of our great leadership here. And I kind of do a little bit of a lot. I help out with making sure our projects on our service side are really set up well, but I also offer production support on all of our internal work as well. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So happy to have everybody here. So we'll start it off with some very easy topics, and we'll kind of get more complex as we go. But the games industry is pretty notoriously ambiguous and not very consistent with titles and definitions. And I think production is probably one of the worst offenders in that area. So maybe just passing it around the room and just getting a general interpretation of what the role of producer means to everybody. So even just throwing it to John, what do you think?
Yeah, you're right. It does mean a lot of different things, and it varies from studio to studio. It depends on the size of the studio. Um, Also, if yeah, you're working with a publisher or you're publishing internally. Ultimately, what I'd say the role of producer is, at a very high level, is to deliver the game on time, on budget, and to quality. I mean, just a very, very high level, and that's pretty universal throughout. But there's quite a few things that can feed into that, and producer is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. They've got to cover a lot of different things. I mean, they're kind of like I'd say the go-to point for what the status is of the project. It's where management can go. It's where publishers can go to find out the latest on the project. And yeah, I mean, there's can go on and on about the things that feed into that. But a big part of it for me is working with the team and all the different disciplines. Involves setting up the schedule, working with them on the roadmap, keeping things on track, and addressing any problems that come up. But what I feel is the most important role of a producer is to allow the team to do their job so that they can focus on their task work and try to move as many obstacles out of the way as possible. Give them the information that they need to do their job. Take away the distractions and let them really spend their time working on what they do best.
Awesome. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Well, John went high level, and I'll go lower level. And I'll say, producers help get shit done. So like, you know, there's an overall vision, and then you have a group of producers who try to carry that vision forward by, you know, removing obstacles, like John said, and getting things out of the way for your content creators so that they're not running into issues every day. You know, you have to be ahead of the game, and you have to know this group's going to need this. What do I need to clear out of the way so that they can get what they need to get done quickly, to quality, you know, on time and on budget. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's part of the ambiguity of the role is kind of what really drew the interest in forming this panel, is that, you know, if I asked a whole bunch of acquaintances and other developers and things to just give me your definition of what a producer is, or what your definition of a great producer is, and I got as many different answers as people I asked. So it became quite apparent that this is such a misunderstood role on a lot of teams, and that was kind of the impetus for starting this panel, was just see like if we could get some clarity around that and maybe just share that with people. So but Skyler, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I think they really knocked it out of the park, but just tying into what they said, yeah, we're kind of a person that wears many hats, and you can kind of fill in any little niche at the studio that you need to. You know, certain studios might have certain roles, like we've recently brought in staff development coordinators at Steamroller, but previously production was filling that role a lot of times, and producers, and making sure the morale of the team was up, making sure everybody was succeeding and happy with what they have outside of just the projects, making sure they were really content with the studio. So it's specific to every single studio what you're going to be filling each role, but there's kind of those all-encompassing core values that every single producer and even production in general has, which is, you know, really strong communication, really strong time management, budgeting skills. Without those, you're never going to really be able to drive the project along. But when it comes down to it, that's where I think, you know, myself as an example, I didn't come with a gaming background. I did not go to school for this, but project management is all encompassing. It's throughout every single industry. You can see it. And as long as you have those core skills, you really can drive your projects forward. So it is always very tough to define this role. I always say that when I'm going into interviews with production coordinator candidates. And I can guarantee the three of us all have very different job responsibilities of what we're each doing in our roles. But going down to like what John said, we're making sure things are staying on budget, making sure that, you know, making sure we're on track when it comes to the timeline of things. If the timeline's going to be impacted, how is then that going to further impact downstream dependencies? And we're going to be able to still accomplish that overall timeline. And if not, where can we find a resolution in it to make sure we're getting as close as possible to that ultimate goal?
Nice. Yeah, I think, you know, piggybacking off of that, you know, what are maybe some of the bigger both misconceptions and things that, you know, people assume might be a part of the role but maybe aren't, and what might be easy versus really, really challenging, especially when it comes to animation. I know we have not a lot of similarities to other sort of products that might be managed in sort of an A to B process, being quite an iterative medium.
I think I can say personally for myself, one of the hardest parts with production is having to have the counterbalance of the success of the project and the comfortability and contentment of my team. I always want to make sure that they are happy in their work. They're not being overpushed. They're not going into crunch. I don't want them going into OT, but I also need to make sure that we're delivering on time and we're succeeding, you know, whether it's for our own IP work or when we're working with clients, we want to make sure everybody's happy. So it's kind of walking that fine line of where can we go? I don't want to push too much that my team is not happy, because an unhappy team is never going to get you anywhere. But that's probably the hardest misconception, is a lot of people think production is the bad guys. They think we're the ones coming in saying, okay, it's crunch time, everybody work, you know, weekends are off, you know, you're going to just be working 50, 60-hour weeks this week. And that's not the case. At least, you know, within Steamroller production, we don't like to push for that. I think a lot of younger production coordinators and producers and managers coming into the picture are really starting to see where that boundary is. And I think that's really impacting the entire industry as a whole and changing that misconception of it's always production versus the artist on the floor. But that's probably the hardest part for myself, because I really try to have a personal relationship with all of my artists, and I want them to always know that I do not value a project more than I value them. I just want to make sure we're getting to the ultimate end goal together happily.
Yeah, I think that's like if I'm thinking about, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about all the, my most productive relationships I've had with a producer, and it's always felt like more of a partnership than, oh no, the cops are here to break up the party kind of thing. But no, that's a great definition. What about anybody else?
That's the first thing that came to mind right now is that's a big challenge of production because you're accountable for the project. You want it to be successful, but you also have to be accountable to your team. A lot of times, you're the spokesperson for the team. You're either working directly with all team members or leads, and if they have an issue that they're escalating to you, you've got to listen and you got to make sure that their concerns are heard. You have to bring that up to management, which might be at different odds, who are concerned about this has to come out on time, and those things are not always in line with one another. And so you have to play that middleman to find a compromise and try to make everyone as happy as possible without putting risk on the project. But it is a challenge sometimes because you don't want to let your team down. You need their trust and that you have their back. But at the same time, you're also accountable to management who has a lot on the line for the project.
Definitely. I think that's, sorry, Caroline, did you want to add
I
something?
don't have anything to add to that. I think they summed it up magically.
Awesome. So
Oh,
sort
you
of
did.
just to kind of, oh, go for it.
I'm sorry. You did ask about misconceptions, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think is pretty interesting. And the one thing I always hear from the team jokingly is like all producers love Excel, and I like it. It's all right. It does what I need to, but I can't say I'm in love. I mean, I do know other producers and especially project managers that absolutely love it, but just there is an exception. I like it. It's all right.
Yeah, I know. I've definitely, it's become a running joke with a lot of the other animators who end up moving into lead and direction roles that you spend less time in the graph editor and a lot more time in Excel and Jira. And I don't envy all of your roles spending time in those programs. So, um, I mean, just kind of continuing on that, conveying stuff that maybe people aren't aware of or maybe don't know as much about the rules. What are some aspects of the role of production that you'd want a lot of animators to know? Because we've got, the audience right now is primarily animation, both in the Twitch and when this ends up on YouTube. And, if you could convey something to the animation team to either make your job easier or to better understand the process, what would you share?
Yeah, I was going to start off with the everybody's probably tired of hearing, but update your tasks in Jira and
Update your
yeah.
Jiras.
But it does make our lives easier, and I think people think sometimes that it's just said by production to annoy them, but it really is. I mean, it helps us to understand the health of the project and to be able to see where there might be issues, where we maybe need to step in and help out. And if we don't have that data, if people aren't updating their task, then we don't know if work is getting done without going to each individual or discipline and speaking to them. So something so simple, just at the end of the day, please update your task. But I'm sure you've heard it before. But yeah, um, yeah, that's all I'm going to say for now.
I would say for myself, it's truthfully communication. There can't be too much of communication between artists and production themselves, because when it comes down to it, every little detail we know from them is just going to make our lives 10 times easier. If you have a shot that is going to be coming in, 2 days after the target originally was set, if I don't know that until that 2 days has passed, then I'm panicking. I'm trying to figure out how is that going to impact everybody else that comes after you? Where is everything shifting out? But if I know that the second you're going to be like, hey, it's going to be coming in a little later, that makes everything so much easier because we can kickstart communication earlier and we can be proactive instead of reactive to the situation. And I think that's where a lot of fires cease and a lot of overwhelmment can happen, is when we're all reacting to a situation and trying to solve it and fix it, as opposed to if we can plan out for it, that's totally fine. And I'm a big believer in I'm never going to get upset in a situation. Aaron just recently said it in the previous panel before this, but there's going to always be fires, 100%. Things are going to always go wrong. I've personally never seen anything in this industry or not, any project go on perfectly without any single issue. If anybody has that, I greatly would love to work with them on their workflow and obtain it myself. But it's going to happen, and it's how you react to those situations and you can plan for them. So communication, ultimately, that is my biggest factor I ask for, because it makes so much thing easier on us.
Yeah, I got to agree. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Just because I got to agree with that 100% is yeah, the communication part. Please let us know if there's an issue. Everybody has their moments when things are expected or planned. It's never a good idea to try to mask that, hide it, hope it goes away, because it very rarely does. But if you bring it up, production should be there to help you. And if you're overwhelmed by a task, you need help. If there's somebody we can point you to get help, if it's a matter of reassigning it to someone else and giving you other work to do, we're happy to do that. I mean, we want you to be successful. We want the project to be successful. And yeah, it is so much easier to be able to do that before it's past the deadline. Let us help you as soon as possible. And a little bit more on communication too is just encouraging communication all around, not just to production when there's an issue or your leads, but please communicate with other teammates. If you're working on a feature with somebody else, don't think that all communication has to go through the producer. There's usually too many team members. We can't be everywhere all the time. Please reach out if you're waiting on something from somebody. It's perfectly fine for you to reach out to them, say, hey, is that going to be ready in a day? I'm ready for it. But don't think that all communication has to go through a producer. I'm very happy to hear when the team is talking to one another, and that's one thing I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, communication can never be stressed enough. I agree. But like planning is key. Know what you need, then communicate it to the right people, and then keep communicating it. Like proselytize it so that there's no misinformation, nothing gets lost, and then update. Like I think that's great. Like then update. Oh, this task is done, so that no one is chasing it down. I also think like your producers lean into your producers. They're the people that are going to help you throughout the whole process. So the more information you give them, or the more you kind of tune into what they're looking for, they're only going to help you through this journey. That seems a bit esoteric, but you know what I mean.
No, I think it's super valid. I always think back to I'm gonna cite a quote from Lana that she said to me a long time ago. I don't know if she said it to me directly, but I heard her say it was, if you think you're communicating enough, you're not. And I've always sort of had that ringing in my head ever since. I thought that was such a wise thing to say. I think it's become even more prevalent now with, like, obviously remote is a thing that's here to stay. We're juggling, asynchronous timelines, asynchronous, like, just online presence in rooms. So I'm super curious, what techniques, what solutions have you found that's worked to both sort of keep communication alive on the team and virtually or digitally, but also how do you handle, replicating the culture, those water cooler moments, like any of that sort of like organic discussions that tend to happen in the office that I don't know if we've quite found a way to replicate that digitally yet, but I'd love to hear if anybody's found any solutions to that so far.
I'm gonna dive in on this one, and it's gonna sound crazy, but I will ask all the dumb questions. Like I assume that if I'm thinking of something, there are probably 3 other people who are thinking the same thing but are afraid to ask. I feel like this whole Zoom world has made it really challenging when you have a team of 20 people to ask those hard questions or dumb questions. So that's what I just keep asking all the questions, and even if it's a dumb question, it gives permission to other people to ask questions. I know that sounds really kind of, again, esoteric and getting feely, but you know what I mean? Like that, I think that's how you grow the culture to be a place where every question is important. And in asking the question and getting it answered, everyone then hears that answer and knows, what we're walking toward.
Especially somebody in a position of management, just saying, like, being vulnerable in that moment,
Yeah.
just saying, I don't know a thing, can somebody help me
Yeah.
do that? It just opens up that window.
Can you rephrase that? Because I'm not sure I understand it, or
Yeah,
XYZ. Anyway, yeah.
absolutely.
I can speak on like the water cooler moments and kind of engaging that office style of conversation, even though we're all largely remote pretty much. Steamroller, we were really lucky that we had a nice little chunk of people already remote fully when everything had happened 2 years ago. So we kind of had an understanding of how we were going to drive this forward. But in the last year, we realized, okay, this isn't going to just be a blip in the timeline and everything's going to go back to normal. Like this is an entire style of work that is now changing. So how do we fit into that? So we've introduced a few different things at the studio. So all of our teams have happy hours, and sometimes they join other teams. Sometimes if it's large enough of a team, it's just on their own. And that's 30 minutes once a week for everybody just to get together and not talk about work. Like we're not talking on Schutts, none of that. We are focusing on having fun, whether that's playing like games online, or there's been teams before that were small and they would all play Overwatch together and then stream it on Twitch for the few who didn't want to play, and they would just watch the gaming going on and they'd all chat on Zoom together. So we've tried to create that, laid back, casual atmosphere. Let's all get together and play a game because that was something we used to previously have when, a large majority of us were together in house. But then we've also introduced things like coffee catch-ups with leadership, which is just, once every 3-4 months, you sit down with your direct manager and you just talk about how are things going, because we don't have those opportunities anymore as much as we used to, per se, where you could just kind of look to your right, look to your left and be like, okay, I'm looking for help with this. Can I get some help? And then we also have every single Monday, a lot of our teams have introduced kind of like it's called a Let's Chat, and it's where the team kind of breaks off into groups and it's just a quick casual conversation of being like, hi, how was your weekend? Did you do anything fun? So it's a way to kind of drive other members of the team together because 2 years ago, large portion of the team would be in studio together. We'd all be chit-chatting. We'd all say hi, bye to each other. And that's not the case anymore. We have people that if they're on different teams, they will never cross paths because we have somebody living in Thailand and somebody who is living within France. And there's no way to really bring them together. They work on different time schedules. So we've tried to introduce these casual atmospheres that will just kind of have everybody chit-chatting. And it's been really, really helpful, mostly with how large of a remote staff we have, even internationally or not within Florida.
Yeah, one thing I think that really helped us at Sumo early on was as everybody was moving to home and working. One thing that the company tried to push, at least in the Nottingham studio, was for people to turn their cameras on, and that made a huge difference because still working with so some other partners and go into their calls. Nobody has their camera on. You don't know what they look like. You talk to them every week, but just having that presence and seeing other humans on the screen, I think helped a lot. But yeah, we'll have some meetings set up. Like I know our code team likes to set up a daily chat where anybody can go on anytime as they're working and just chit chat with other coders in the studio, maybe working on different projects, but they just don't have the same kind of chance to see and talk with one another, bounce things off of each other. So they'll just set up a daily chat when they have no other meetings. They can continue working. They may talk about strange articles in the news, whatever, but just a chance to socialize. And then on a company basis, yeah, we would have Friday activities where it was anybody in the studio who wanted to get together to do trivia or play some sort of online game together. And especially with a multi-project studio, it's just people that normally you wouldn't necessarily see every day when you're in the same building. But especially now that we're remote, you have no contact with them, you have no meetings with them. But it's a chance to see people like, hey, yeah, I remember you. I'm working with you, and it's a chance to see them.
Yeah, I think
So
it's interesting. Different disciplines are thriving in different ways in this new environment. I know, maybe it's a stereotype, but I know a lot of engineers who are quite happy that they get this real focus time now versus working in an open office that we historically have. And but a lot of animators, the culture does tend to really revolve around being, having those discussions, having that camaraderie, having those social interactions that help fuel ideas and spitballing things around. So that's definitely felt missed, and it's a lot of, I know I'm always part of discussions on how do we find ways to replicate that. I think on my side, coming into year 3, I guess, of this, the thing I still see us doing is, and it puts a lot of ownership on you all actually at this point, because you're really defining the schedules, defining when people do get together and have these discussions, but we're still very much staying on a producer's schedule for things where it feels like it's not really paying attention to, I always refer back to this really old article that talked about a maker versus a manager schedule. We're still very much on a manager schedule, which works in 30-minute increments, and a lot of discussions don't fit neatly into those 30-minute increments, and rather leaving those times where we would historically get in a room in front of a whiteboard and just ideate on things. Or you might need, I think Josh was mentioning it in the panel before this, but just allowing that time at front of a meeting to have those social discussions and have that sort of linking up, which we tend to get right to it nowadays. And like you said, cameras are off, we're getting to the point, we get out of that room and we just go back to our isolation. I think that's creating that divide a lot of times in teams nowadays.
Yeah, and one thing that I found hard to replicate and that I really miss is those brainstorming sessions. When you're in a room together, somebody's on the whiteboard, and you can kind of simulate that online. There's some programs out there where you can put things on post-it notes, move it around, organize ideas. But I found that the thing that I still haven't been able to replicate is these side conversations that happen while somebody's up at the whiteboard, and somebody's whispering to somebody else about an idea, and then it comes, it's brought up to the group. You don't get that with being online, because only one person can speak at a time. So that's one thing that I still miss, and I'm looking for a way to try to get that additional input that I feel like we're lacking now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely think Zoom has made it a little more intimidating with having to, if you're in a full call together, all speak at once. And it's been something we're all trying to work with our artist on, and feeling comfortable, speak up, like bring your ideas. If you don't understand a note, or you think a note might not work because maybe you've already tried that already, that's okay. Let us know. It's a lot more, I know it can be intimidating because there's a lot more people, as opposed to maybe back in the day when we were doing desk side rounds and it was just you and your leadership directly one-on-one. But it's okay, because like we've already said in this call, there's probably other people like having that same question. There might be somebody who has that same thought process, or they're needing to see a new workflow or an approach to something. They're working with the same asset. They're kind of doing a shot that's a lot similar to yourself. So trying to get artists and everybody just feeling comfortable in coming to the table, even if it's going to be a larger call. Constantly navigating that, and always encouraging our artists more and more to talk every single day. But definitely something I've seen a change since the last 2 years, since this pandemic hit, and continuously trying to get better at it, because I know, like I said, we're not going to just jump right back to how everything was and before 2020.
Absolutely. Well, I think that first year, most everybody was, well, we're just going to go back to normal anyways, and it's going to end. And then that last year, like 2021, we started to realize, like, no, this is the new normal now. And now teams are hiring, like myself, I'm remote. A lot of studios have hybrid. I don't know many studios that are going back 100% full time. So now we're having to address these problems head on and really have these discussions, which is, I think, is great, because people are realizing you see lots of articles about the Great Resignation. It's so easy to have high turnover now, because it's easy you don't even have to leave your seat to switch jobs anymore.
Yeah.
So it's good. It is a forcing function of, discussing team culture, studio culture.
I remember in the beginning of 2020, everybody, when a lot of jobs were struggling with that transition to going fully remote, the animation and the game industry didn't struggle initially as much with it, because we were like, well, a lot of our stuff is online. It's easy to transfer assets as long as you get your computer set up properly. We're good to go. But then in 2021, once everybody else was comfortable, we were like, oh, now we have to pay attention to the whole like cultural change of things. We did fine with the actual process and workflow change, but how do we drive conversation? How do we get people like interacting? Because it's not so much of a a similar departmental sense as anything outside of this industry is, where you're collaborating every single day on one common goal. Like, yes, we're working on one show together, but Jane may have a completely different shot than John, and they never are going around each other because they're completely doing two different things. And so it's definitely the last year has been paying attention to now, okay, we're doing great with the workflow, but how do we drive our artists to feel motivated and like they're in this collaborative space when they were once, all together in a studio in front of a whiteboard, working on concept together.
When you touched on it there as well, is that it is, I personally find it, and I don't usually have too much trouble jumping into a group discussion, but it is really, really daunting if you're in a Zoom call with 20, 30, 40 people to speak up in those moments. And you find, it ends up sort of the offshoot of that is there tends to be a whole discussion happening in chat to sidebar the main discussion. It gets very distracting and everybody's trying to herd it back. So there's absolutely, I don't know the exact number, but there's definitely a critical mass where it feels still that you can retain that organic sort of back and forth nature of a discussion. Like we're kind of having it here, but add 4 more people and now everybody sort of is waiting to speak rather than listening and engaging. And it almost means we have to have like multiple versions of the same conversation to disseminate information or something. I don't know. Definitely a challenge. So maybe transitioning over to a little bit more process, and we touched on it maybe a little bit earlier, but I'd love to get everybody's thoughts on this, is that animation by its very nature is an iterative process. It's not a sort of binary, it's either done or it isn't. It's in various stages of doneness until we ultimately just abandon it. So how have you found like meaningful ways to track it? I mean, this could be software, this could be whatever, but a lot of even software like Jira, Handsoft, Waterfall, like Microsoft Project, things like that really just have like it goes to here and it drops. Whereas, and we'll dovetail this into a larger product sort of discussion, but animate like a piece of animation work. How have you found if you have found a meaningful way to track that type of iterative work? Or nobody has yet.
Anybody? I can. On our side, it's kind of two different. We've had a little bit of a workflow from when we were smaller of a studio at Steamroller, and now we're kind of in the middle of upping it just as we're getting larger and larger. And previously, we would use a lot of Google Docs, Excel, all the traditional spreadsheets, and it was great. But we found that we were kind of recording the same information in multiple places, which was putting a little more stress on production itself, because it'd be like, okay, hours just came in, now I need to update this spreadsheet and then this spreadsheet as well. So in the last about a year, I'd say we've been trying to streamline it and have really heavily been using ShotGrid. And while we've always utilized ShotGrid, we've never utilized it as heavy in the sense of what we're trying to push into currently, because we realized there was so much more that we could do within it. We were using multiple softwares that had the similar, aspects as ShotGrid, but why weren't we just using it within ShotGrid itself if we're already paying to utilize that program? And I've seen a lot of success within that because our ShotGrid is paired to our task tracking system. So where our artists log their hours, then that's pulled back into ShotGrid. And if you can find your way to structure your pages properly, it can pull in everything at once. You change a singular date on if something's going to be, say a deadline change or a start date change. You can just change that date and then it'll read it across the entire Gantt chart and push everything out alongside with it. And it just makes everything a lot more clearer of a visual, personally, when you're working on something, mostly if you're going to be working on a full pipeline and you're seeing everything from pre to post and you're having to track how is modeling going to impact when we're pushing into comp. Where is that change going to push all the way down this pipeline? So we've seen a lot of success with ShotGrid. I've been really pushing it and recommending it to everyone, and we're still learning more and more about it every single day because it's there's so much to it as a program. But it's really helped as we're pushing into larger and larger work, mostly as we're currently working on a lot of in-house stuff. It's been very, very helpful on our side, just with making sure we're not losing anything in the process. Because when you're working on a show for, year, 2 years, even longer, it's very easy to forget something that happened a year and a half ago is going to still impact you, halfway down the line.
Absolutely. How about the other two? Any other ideas? Thoughts?
You go ahead, John. Did you open your mic?
Yeah. Well, no, I was. Yeah, I mean, I take that because, like, yeah, it's not necessarily done, not done. That there's always iteration, and that just brings to mind, like, so part of the question, like, how do you get people to stop? Because you can iterate on and on and on, just like any art discipline. I mean, there's environment art, character art, where they would love to go on and on, and you could go on to get it to perfection. And so, to some extent, yeah, I think you do have to set some sort of time limit to get it up to a level of quality that's acceptable. Maybe not where everybody wants it to be, but that's why in a good production plan, you do have time for polish at the end, where you can go through and take up those important components that really are going to have high visibility, and get it up to the higher standard that you want to. For example, then maybe somebody is trying to be, get an NPC animation perfect, and it's something that maybe 10% of the players will see for maybe 5 seconds, and all that effort went into there where it could have been spread out across the other task as well. So yeah, just taking that question a little bit different of, yeah, how do you take a task that could have infinite iteration, and just get it to a level where it's good enough. You'll find out further in development which pieces really are going to shine, and need that extra bit of love at the end.
Yeah, I have to lean into that one too and just say that's someone has to say it's done. Like as artists, you will continue to go and go and go and make it better and better and better, but there has to be like these levels of, well, that's a goat in the background that's 100 yards away. So just make that goat, and then we're gonna move on to this animation that is really close on camera, right? Like there has to be someone that's kind of guiding that. So I'm assuming the animation director is the person that says, okay, you build a whole bunch of goats that we're going to put out in the field, but we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it. And then really focus in on that content that you want to sing, or that defines the game in a certain way.
So what have you all found works well at defining what good enough looks like in these instances? It's a very complicated question.
It's so subjective, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's where I'll lead on a lead for support, or a senior member of the team. Because I'm not an animator myself. I'm not an artist myself. It's hard for me to go and say, no, that's good enough. It's like I'm not one really to be the best judge of that. So I rely on the expertise of my team to be able to set that is it functional? Does it represent what the final animation or asset is going to be? It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's get it to that level where it's functional, representative, so that there's not a stretch of imagination to say, well, how's that really going to be like in the game? And then later on is when you can come back and do a pass to get everything up to the same quality standard for that set of assets, and pay more attention to those that are going to get more screen time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is where, things like animation Bibles and having proper direction on the team definitely help clarify when to walk away or leave it alone. But so
I think
oh, sorry, go for it.
I was just gonna say, kind of just tagging on to what John said. It's all like never the call comes from, at least with my studio from my side, but it's about creating the open dialogue of where we're sitting. It's a lot easier to say, oh, I want to fix this thing when you think like 10 hours have gone into it. But when the transparency comes up of like, no, it's actually already at, 30, 40, 50 hours. And it's like, okay, that wasn't worth it anymore. That small little tweak is not worth all of that, like that another 10 hours on top of it. So making sure that open communication is always happening, and being like, just a reminder, this is where we're sitting currently, because that's where I've seen a lot of where the defining line of it's worth it, or let's go forward with this change, versus that's a wish list, that's a CBB. If we ever get the time, we can come back to it. We would love to circle back and hit that note, but But right now we have bigger and badder things to go to. The goat in the background, we got to move on from it.
I'd actually say, because having worked with Steamroller in the past on projects and animation, that was I'm going to use the word negotiation, but I don't think it's the right word there. But that was a part of that relationship that I found actually lacking in studio task management, is that that type of information was very much pushed towards us as a team and said, we're at this stage. If you want this next thing, it's going to cost X. Where that conversation, I found, typically doesn't happen at the studio level. It tends to happen as somebody upstream wants a change, everybody finds a way to fit, and this ends up being like, how do you fit more time in the same amount of time, rather than saying, you're ordering more food off the menu, here's what it's going to cost, decide now if you want to pay that cost. And I think that's maybe something we could incorporate better into main sort of studio level production, for sure. Sorry, John, I cut you off there.
Also, like, what happens once you make that change? What are the repercussions to any downstream teams?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a whole added bonus, I like to call it. It's an added bonus when you have to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important, because as producers, that's one thing, is that it's always our job to have the big picture, right? We're always looking at the big picture. And we forget sometimes that team members are so drilled into their work sometimes that they're not taking a step back and seeing the big picture. Like, okay, this is a quantity of work that I have to do. This is the amount of time I have to do it. They're focused on that one asset and getting it done. But it's not even just one milestone. It's milestone after milestone, and just being able to see, okay, this is what portion of the game this represents. If you're at a state where you have builds that you can play the game, I think I encourage the team to play the game and see how their piece fits into the big picture. And I think that sometimes as production, I'm always reminding myself that not everybody has the big picture that I have, and it's my job to communicate to them and encourage them to go play the build and see how their work is impacting others, and yeah, how it all fits together.
All roads lead back to communication.
Well
I guess.
said. Well said.
So even getting a little bit further out, because I think Caroline actually touched on what I'd love to chat about next, is the different phases of production. Historically, I see a trend more and more throughout my time in the industry, that we tend to be much more focused on pre-production and getting a little more disciplined around that phase of it. How have you found meaningful ways to account for that work, know when it's time to leave pre-production, when the right time is to leave production? Because I think we've found, this might be a subjective statement, but we found that a lot of crunch down at the back end, it can be traced back to a lack of clarity around pre-production. So how have you found ways to clarify that? When is it time to leave? When do you what's your criteria for that, basically?
For a lot of the projects I've worked on, it's really identifying what are the biggest risks of the project, the biggest unknowns, and it's about clarifying that and proving that we have the ability to overcome those. It's like identifying your highest risk. Let's tackle them. Let's go through them. Prove that it can be done. It doesn't have to be done to perfection, but get it to a state where we're confident that we can move forward onto it. We can build on it. Yeah, and then that's a key thing that removes a lot of the risk further down the project. That you go in with these big plans, and when you get to the stage of the big scary thing you've been avoiding, and you find out that it's not possible, or not, the work leading up to that doesn't fit well with that. That's when you run into a lot of problems. That's when you start worrying about crunch time at the end. So yeah, and you can still have clear goals for pre-production on what is it that we're setting out to do? Is it to prove the core experience of the game? Is it to prove out that we can do this feature and this feature to some component of a game that we have already? So I think it's fairly easy to define. And one thing that we've tried recently to help ensure the success of it is by being a bit more general on. I mean, we set clear goals, but we don't tell the team how they have to achieve it. So it gives them more ownership on how they're going to approach solving that problem, or meeting that objective. We find that, just getting that kind of buy-in from the team, that they've been exceeding our expectations. Really, they're getting that work done and more. So yeah, that's something that we've done recently that's worked really well for us.
Anybody else want to add any thoughts?
I guess from my side, we're still learning and growing at Steamroller ourselves every single day with how do we, get through concept without pushing out too far. That's still, internally, we always want to make sure we're putting out the art that represents ourselves and to make sure we are so happy with it. I think that's one of the best parts about being a studio that's started by artists themselves is their passion towards their own artwork. But sometimes we have to be careful that we're not prioritizing the art over every other part of it itself. There's a lot of other things, budget, timeline, everything else, downstream dependencies. And we're always navigating how to get better at that. And I think we've had a lot of learning opportunities with it. I think when we first started with Spice Frontier, that was our first time going through it. We learned with Deadwood when we worked on Master as well. Every single time we're trying to shorten the concept process so we're not pushing out too far, but we also want to make sure, being a smaller studio, we are so happy and proud of our work because it takes its time 100%. And I think we have our focus of what is the most important thing that accomplishes what we want to accomplish. Kind of like with the goat thing we were saying. There's certain areas that we can continue to iterate on it, but those things are not going to ultimately be worth our time in the long run. And if that's going to impact a bunch of downstream dependencies, let's not go into that. But when it comes to our main characters, when it comes to main sets, like that's something we're going to continue to iterate on. And we try to make sure when it comes to iteration, we pay attention to assets, environments, anything that's going to be needed to be done first, because then maybe we can continue to tweak the concept as we're pushing into layout. There's certain things that aren't going to matter this early on. We can get a little maneuvering with it. It's not always easy. We're definitely playing with a lot of different timelines, but it's always something we're learning and growing on. And I think in the last few internal projects we've worked on, we've started to streamline our own concept process, but I love hearing everybody else's input to bring back to our own studio.
Yeah, animation, any task management's always tricky. I'm sure everybody's super aware of, you try to time box something and the task will always expand to fit the time that it's been given. So it's just, it's such a chicken or the egg problem a lot of times with those. But sort of keeping on with the whole crunch theme, because it is a very hot topic in games, and I know probably outside of games as well. But up till now, a lot of the dialogue around that has typically just pushed the blame up to management, up to production, and things like that. I think I'd love to hear people's thoughts on how valid that assumption is, how valid that statement is, but also what are things that you have tried that have worked, that have moved the needle towards that work-life balance that we've all been trying to get to, but also maybe what are some assumptions that people are making that they can take some ownership over correcting that for themselves as well.
So work-life balance is one of the most important things for me. It's actually probably like my ultimate thing I like to focus on within production. I like to make sure everyone's happy. I think I said it earlier in the call, but I want my artists to be happy because in the end, the best possible quality product is going to come out from them. We're going to succeed. Everyone's happy. And it's very tricky because crunch, like you said, is a very tough topic. And a lot of times it does get, when you kind of trace it back, we have to be the messengers of it. We're not the ones ultimately always making the decision, but it's easy to shoot the messenger than the person sending the message. And I try to have honest conversations with my artist. I never try to take advantage of them. I never want them to push into crunch or OT if it's not necessary at all. And we'll sit down and we'll have a conversation and we'll be like, you know what, it's not necessary at this time point. And this is a time it might be necessary. And I think having that open dialogue between production and the artist really helps removing that defining line I talked about earlier, where it's always production versus the artist. It helps bring together what we want to accomplish as the common goal. But when it comes to having to avoid crunch, it's very difficult. It's very hard to a year out of be like, how do I avoid over the next 365 days plus anything that's going to push out people, anything that's going to push out the timeline. It's almost impossible. So it's about compromising. That's where I found the biggest thing. Open dialogue, like I said, and also assessing where it can be worthwhile. And also, for at least us on our service side, having open conversations with our clients as well. I think a lot of times people look at the relationship between clients as you're just trying to please them, because ultimately we all want to have our clients happy. But also, this is a team dynamic. We're coming together for this, so let's have a conversation. If we don't think we're going to be able to get it done by April 4th, hey, maybe we can push out to April 11th. Maybe that's actually possible. Maybe April 4th was their tight timeline and they actually have a little bit of an extended out timeline. We also always try to have two timelines at Steamroller. We'll always have the perfect world scenario where if everything happens on course and it's a dream, that's when we'll get it done by. But we also try to take into account a buffer timeline as well. So we try to think ahead of potential issues that might need to provide buffer. So then when situations with buffer do need to arise, we're not having to push into crunch because we've already tried to take into account that extra time needed.
Yeah, avoiding crunch is something that has been a big topic at Sumo for years now. And yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think there's been a project in the last 3 years that I've worked on where the team had to crunch. And we've gotten around that by one, during the initial planning, making sure that there's a reasonable amount of contingency in the plan. Of course, everybody likes to know how quick can you get it done the fast possible. But we really push to build contingency in the plan because we know everything's not going to go as planned. There are going to be some challenges along the way, things that are unexpected, illnesses on the team, whatever, things that you can't predict. So number one, we try to build in that contingency into each milestone. Another thing that we do is making sure to account for everybody's holiday. I know that's one thing where other places I've worked, they haven't. When you're working on the plan, you don't account for how many days everybody gets off per year. You need to account for that into the schedule. You don't know what days that they're taking off, but at some point they're going to do it during that year. So don't take those whatever is 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the company offers, and just forget that and assume that that work's going to get done when people are away. So not to forget about that. And probably one of the most effective thing is that being transparent with management, your partner, whoever it is that you have to report to on the status of the project. Yeah, it's not fun to go to them with bad news or things aren't going as planned. But again, as we were talking about earlier, when you encourage the team to, if you have a problem, come let production know as soon as possible. Let us help you rather than having to be reactive, after it's too late to really help. The same goes with the partners or the people that you're accountable to. As long as they're kept in the loop of what challenges you're facing, what it is that's taking longer than expected, what's causing the delay. As long as they're part of that conversation, they're aware of it early enough. They tend to be more sympathetic with the situation, and you can more easily get that extra time rather than springing it on them. You're going along the production path, and you think, well, we can make up the time along the way, or something's going to happen where we're going to be able to catch up, and that's very difficult to do. And then you get to 2 months out, and you're like, oh, by the way, we need more time. It's a total shock to them. They've already got all the marketing wheels spinning. They've done their buys. They made their announcement of the release date. It's not easy for them to stop that, change it, and go back. Whereas if production is transparent, management is transparent with the partner along the way, they tend to be much more sympathetic and will work with you before they've gotten too far down a path where it's difficult to change.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think again, it's always coming back to transparency and communication, really, with a lot of these things. So
yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, so I wanted to kick it out to some questions from the chat and the stream, and this one is for Caroline specifically. As someone who comes from a much more of the creative side of things and is also on the production side, kind of straddling both things, how have you found it easier or harder to balance the whole conversation around quality with that background in mind? Because I know that this is sort of an ongoing thing in production to figure out, as we mentioned before, how is done defined and what is good enough. As somebody who lives in both worlds, how have you wrestled with that?
I mean, 17 years ago, I wrestled with it way more because I was specifically like in the voiceover land. And so I would be like, I got to change this. And people would say, but if you change that, you're going to, the cinematic team is going to have to rework all of that. So slowly I just learned to kind of take a step back. And like John was talking about, like you have to see the big picture. You have to be able to go up to that 30,000 foot level and see the whole product. And then you can come back in and look at it and say, do I really need to change that? What is the grander effect? Like how it's going to make the game better? Is it? Probably not. So just shut it down, right? But that takes years of kind of practice, really. And I have to say, like having seen both sides has really helped me in the creative world. Like understanding production has only benefited my creative leg of the work that I do, because I can kind of look at it and say, what are the really key moments that I want to spend all of my time looking at, and where are the pieces that don't need that much massaging? Did that answer the question?
No, that's fantastic. That's actually a really interesting thing to kind of almost add on to what we were just talking about, is just that level of exposure that a lot of people don't get to the overall scope of the project, what's important, what the values are for the team in the studio, and understanding how those pieces all fit together. Because we tend to get really myopic with our own craft, our own discipline, our own, I need this thing to be perfect for my demo reel or something like that, rather than is it really elevating the needs of the product that we're all trying to ship. So yeah,
and I think like as artists, it's really like you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so you're trying to hold on to every beat, like every goat is important. I'm liking that we're using the goat before.
I'm gonna be using that myself now too.
But yeah, like just and then as a producer, like really respecting your artists, like that's a key thing, right? Like, and I'm hearing that from John and Skyler, and just like they, of course, look at their artists and want to support their artists, and that's the key. That for me, that's the key. You have to support your artists because they're creating your game, and if they don't feel passionate about it or creative, then you're not going to get the work you need from them.
No, that's a great way to place it. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to try and sneak one more in, and I love this question. So quick thoughts from everybody before we close it out. If you could wave a magical producer wand and fix a systemic issue in game development, what would it be? I'll start with Caroline there. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Don't start with me. I have to think about that.
Okay, John.
I was trying to take the time to think about it.
Tyler, you want to jump in while everybody's thinking?
While everyone's thinking, probably, honestly, no timelines. Getting to take as long as you want for something, but in the world, nobody cares. It would be a blink of an eye, even if it took 20 years, because ultimately, every single person on the team and the artists themselves want to put out the best quality product. They want that's their representation, like, of themselves right there on that screen in that game. And I want to make sure every time they see it, they're like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to put out. I spent the exact amount of time on that I wanted to. And if every single person could have that, even if it takes 20 years, then I'll be happy. I don't think publishers and, supporters of things would be too happy having to wait that long. But again, with my magic wand, I would just delete all the time, but let the artist still have it.
I think everybody could agree with that one. How about the rest of you? John, Caroline, you got anything?
That's a really good one, actually. I hadn't even thought of it. I was going to say something like get rid of pre-production, because I feel like we get just hammered in pre-production, and I'd rather just be in production where we're throwing stuff against the wall. So, but no, people are going to disagree with that one. So I'm going to go with the time. There's my magic wand. You have all the time in the world.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like that one too. But yeah, wow, 20 years, that's a long time to wait for a game.
The next version of a game, yeah.
So yeah, but no, if I can wait for my magic wand, I mean, there's still articles that come up, and some of the old school mentality that exists in gaming, and just doing away with that, and some of the yeah thought process that crunch time has to be part of the project. It's something that everybody has to go through. I used to always think that. I went through it. Um, I expected that would be always be the way, and now I've had a chance to work on some projects where that's not required, and it's great. It's great not having parts of your job that you dread. It's great having people you can work with that you actually like, all the way up to upper management, and not have to worry about people coming and screaming at you and using this kind of intimidation for management. And I see that going away, which I'm very happy about, because work should be a place that we enjoy coming to. People can be creative. We can put something together that's really cool, and not live under the feeling of intimidation or pressure. It's just absolutely not necessary.
Yeah, that's an awesome place to leave it. So thanks, John. And thank you, Caroline, John, and Skyler, for joining us today. It's been a great talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Make sure you stay tuned for our next session, which is a panel, animation direction.